When it comes to teaching local history at secondary level, it can be difficult to find resources that really capture students' imagination. Well, today on Resource Review, we're looking at 3 that might just help. They are a box of local artefacts, editions of regional trade directories through the years, and a website about Victorian crime. Recommending today's resources is Alf Wilkinson. Alf is a writer, part-time history teacher and education manager of the Historical Association. On the panel today is John Clark, Deputy Head with responsibility for the history curriculum at Walsall Academy. And we also have Dave Martin, a freelance history advisor. Welcome all to the show. And Matthew Tosh, our resource investigator, has visited a school to find out what a teacher and his students think about the resources that we're going to be discussing. Now, Alf, generally speaking, when we're thinking about local history, are there many resources across the country to help teachers teach this subject?
Yes. I think local history scares lots of teachers. They say, I'm not from round here, I don't know the area. And there's not an off-the-peg resource like a history textbook for Key Stage 3 or Key Stage 4. So they do require a little bit of investigation, of chasing, of working out, and the confidence to use them and develop your own materials.
OK, well, the first resource that you're advocating is a local history box of artefacts that can be supplied from a local museum. And on the table in here, we've got the contents of one such box that comes from a museum near Luton. Now, explain the resource to us, though, and how it works.
Well, children love handling artefacts. Now, some museums have local artefacts boxes, some don't. You need to chase around and find out. And what's in them varies. I mean, here we have a First World War box that you may well teach the First World War rather than local history through. But equally, you can approach a topic like the First World War through the Roll of Honour, through postcards, through newspaper clippings, through photographs. You can actually personalise the war in a way that sometimes doing the big picture of the trenches you don't get.
Thank you. Well, Matthew Tosh has visited Barnfield South Academy in Luton to see how a World War I local history box went down in the classroom.
Well, I'm here at the Academy and we're about to see John Blair's Year 9 class getting their hands on some real museum artefacts. Let's see what they make of them.
So we're going to have an investigation on museum artefacts. The idea is that you use the artefacts to do a set of questions.
John, can you tell me how you've been using the loan boxes today?
Yes, well, the loan box contained quite a selection of materials, so we were able to split the class into 4 groups, and each of them looked at an aspect of the box. So some worked on actual artefacts, some worked with cards, and some worked with magazines.
And how was that received by the children?
Well, I thought it was excellent, to be honest, because as I went round the groups, I found many of them discussing and talking with each other. I thought the interaction was much better than sometimes is.
And what's the benefit of actually having a resource there that you can handle it?
Well, it's seeing it, isn't it? It's all well and good seeing it on a film or reading about it in a book, but being able to touch it and look at it is a real bonus.
But you can't open some of the artefacts, is that an issue?
Yes, that was a slight shame, but I can appreciate that the museum does want to look after its materials, and suppose any slight tear, a bit of damage, and that's it lost.
Well, you've got a different stamp for the butcher and the baker. Yes, so you obviously didn't buy the same things at the 2 places.
So you had a stamp for each place you went to?
Looks like it, doesn't it? And so your overall impression of the box?
I thought the boxes were excellent, mainly because they drove many of the pupils, if not all of them in fact, to try and find out some extra information.
Thank you very much, John. And now, on that note, I'll hand you back to Hermione.
John, what do you make of the use of local history boxes?
I think it's great that people are amazingly allowed to touch these valuable resources. I did feel that it was nice to see them. It's nice to see children, you know, they try it on immediately as you get hold of something, put the hat on, the wrapping, the webbing around the hands, which is around the legs, but we're getting there with it. We're seeing a cap on the table to say to someone, that was actually worn by someone from our area. It could have been that the resources that were in the sealed plastic envelopes, I wish they would be given photocopies so they could see the inside. Obviously, we've got to take care of these things, but it would have been nice if they could see all of the content because there's so much there.
Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, I think they're an excellent item for students to handle, because it's the idea you're touching something that somebody in the past touched. There's that immediate connection. And I think what John was saying about the things that were in sealed containers, that's entirely appropriate, isn't it, to preserve them. But it's the sort of thing where if a teacher's done some preparation in advance, you can do some, you've got a photocopy of it, you've got the text, and the students can interact with the text in some of the sort of literacy style ways that teachers can use. So there's some nice things to do with peace celebrations. They could actually get into what it's actually talking about, even though they can't handle it.
OK, thank you. Well, time now to move on to Alf's second recommendation for us today. And it's these rather intriguing looking red books on the table here. These are old editions of Kelly's Directory. Now, tell us about these directories, Alf.
Well, I think it's important to remember that the directories were a commercial product. They were the yellow pages of the time. You know,
when did they date from?
The first ones are from the 17th century, but they were a commercial resource. Kelly's or any of the others would go around, collect the information, and they'd go knocking on everybody's door in the town or the village saying, here, you want it, you're in this. And that's one of their attractions, that they seek to include everybody. And because they're annual publications, you can trace changes in your local village or your local town. And if we go to, this is Kelly's Luton 1898, but if we went to 1897, you can follow trades and the changing fortunes of families and professions.
And I see at the back there was also advertisements.
Yes. Now for me the advertisements are an instant window into a different world.
OK, well now let's go back to Matthew, who's still at Barnfield South Academy, where the class now are using old editions of Kelly's Directories.
And yet they're stacked full of information about what life was like, certainly in Luton and in Bedfordshire, but just before and during World War I.
John, can you tell me how you've been using Kelly's Directory to teach local history?
Well, this is our first experience of using Kelly's Directories. I was overwhelmed really with the amount of information that was in there. Certainly I found lots of information from them.
So what have we got here?
It's a book on like what all the jobs that all the like in the war that the men could do.
Okay. And what sorts of jobs have you come across?
Basket makers, blacksmiths, plumbers, tilers, bricklayers.
Now there's a lot of information in the directories. How much work do you have to put in to put a lesson together?
Well, I think you could go overboard, but you would have to select sections of the directories and use them appropriately with whichever area you're studying.
And what makes it worth putting the effort in getting hold of these directories?
It is what's in there. Some of the pupils actually found members of their family in the directories themselves, and many of them found parts of Luton that they lived in for years were in the directories, and they could find information about what it was like. I was very pleasantly surprised that they took on the information that were in the directories, because often faced with just a page of writing, they're not overexcited, but I was very pleased with the response. I didn't know this until it was in the book, and how it dates back to King Offa, who was remembered for building something called Offa's Dyke.
So given what you've seen so far, what's your overall impression of the directories?
I thought they were excellent, and I was really pleased with the pupils' response to the information they were given.
That's good to hear. Thank you very much, John, and we'll get back to the studio.
Well, Dave, Kelly's Directory seemed to go down very well in that classroom. What do you make of them?
I love using Kelly's Directories, to be honest. I used to use them when I was teaching in Bromsgrove, and the youngsters would use them to explore the changing pattern of employment in the town. So, for example, in the 1830s, 40s, you could see the arrival of the railway. So they looked like quite a dry resource on the surface, but actually when you put the preparation into thinking about what you wanted to do with them as a teacher, you got some really fascinating material out of them.
John, what do you make of them?
I think with the changes that are happening with all of our towns in Britain, to go back and look at where the roots are with students and say, you know, this is why your town was here, this is what happened over time and changed, even though we're talking about missing gaps and sequences, and even though we can't have sometimes the real thing, why can't we go to the local library? Go to the local library. Those skills are really important, and I'm sure that if you say to a local librarian, we'd really love to come down, look at your Kelly's directories, we have some photocopies, can we do a workshop with you? I'm sure that they will be saying yes, yes, yes all the way.
OK, let's move on to Alf's third choice of resource for us today, and it's a website called Victorian Crime and Punishment. Alf, we've got it here on the laptop. Talk us through this resource.
Well, it's a huge database of prisoners from most of the 19th century, from 3 prisons, from Bedford Prison, from Cambridge Prison and from Huntingdon Prison. There's several case studies, prisoner case studies, like on the front page here we have Henry Catlin, who was deported for stealing 3 and 6pence. And that immediately grabs kids' attention. And there's thousands and thousands of these prisoners, their details and the supporting material on the jails, on the justice system and so on. But it's really these prisoner records that are the meat of the resource.
Presumably, this is a great website for teaching local history. Are there other websites like this?
It is obviously a local resource, and you will need to ferret around in your local area to find this or the equivalent.
John, what do you make of a website like this?
Prisoner of the day, fantastic. I wonder if he's served with soup. Absolutely great. I really do think it's brilliant. It's not something I've come across, but I would say that I'd move away from my local history and say we could plan a unit around this, just around crime and punishment, and link to this and say, right, students, you know, let's go out and see what we can find in our area, because this would be a great starter for them for a local area. It's teaching a skill. Skills are important, and learning to learn, and that is the skill that's important here. But what a great resource, and everybody loves a bit of death and gore and murder and stealing and people locked up in chains.
Easy in history.
Yes.
Dave, what do you make of this resource?
Yeah, because the first thing I did when I looked at it was I looked at the database of the prisoners, and I looked for people in the 1830s, people to do with the swing riots. So that you should find them in prison records through the 1830s through to about 1832, setting fire to hayricks and smashing up threshing machines. So I looked at it with that in mind, and what I liked about the resource online was that I could search by keywords. I could type in arson, and I could type in a particular year, and it would give me information about that. So it helped me to find my way through it. So I think it also illustrates something interesting for students, that you can't just go to a resource and expect the answer to hit you in the face. You've got to do some work. You've got to think around, well, what search inquiry words might help me to get at that.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today, but just to recap, the 3 resources that we've looked at are local history loan boxes from your local museum, such as those from the Learning Service at Museums Luton, back editions of Kelly's directories from your local library or archive office, and Victorian Crime and Punishment website from the East of England Broadband Network. For more information about the resources that we've featured today, go to our website. It's teachers.tv/resource review, or if you want to, email us, resourcereview@teachers.tv. I'd like to say a very big thank you to our panel, to Alf, to John and to Dave, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Resource Review. Bye-bye.